Today I am celebrating Neil Young, a man who I struggled to love in the beginning and I struggle to love to this day. And so it may seem particularly unusual that I would include him, and yet I have indeed developed a profound love for this man, whose voice in the early days I found whiny and irritating and could not understand why my older brother and his close friend would insist on playing me so much Neil Young that I objected to so vehemently. And they looked at me and said, "You'll learn." And I think I have. I do see Neil Young almost as an exercise in loving someone that you disagree with. Today it's very uncommon that we it really truly embrace someone of a differing opinion. It's so common these days to see people who, one disagreement and that's enough to want to go in opposite directions. And I remember when I moved to France as a younger man, I was really struck by how in cafe culture you could have two people that sit next to each other of completely different political persuasions who would passionately debate, argue every day over their coffees sitting out in the sunshine, and presumably really disliking each other and each other's viewpoints, and yet clearly loving each other nevertheless, sharing this bond and this passion of exploration of ideas. And I suppose this is how I consider my relationship with Neil Young, because in recent years he's come out with things that I consider absolutely abhorrent, and he is very, very far from my own viewpoints on a number of subjects. And yet his music conveys so much heart and soul, so much passion, so much tenderness. How could I ever doubt his humanity or question whether or not his motives are good? When I first encountered his voice and just his high-pitched wailing did absolutely nothing for me, this old man borderline country music, these long guitar solos that I had quickly fallen out of love with, I just rebelled against everything about him. He just seemed like an old grey dinosaur moaning on about in sort of love songs. It was like, why are you exposing me to this music and insisting that I will like it? Well, over time I've come to realise that those long rambling guitar solos were beautiful explorations, simple, heartfelt expressions, painting silence with notes, an expression of something tender that goes beyond words. And the words of his work was always meaningful enough and yet poetic enough to not be boring. Just a simple piece like The Needle and the Damage Done was such a profound piece in terms of explaining his experience of seeing how much and how badly drugs had affected his generation. The needle and the damage done. So many people lost this open act of grieving. One thing that really struck me about him is that when I was 18, as a reward for having finished my exams, my older brother's best friend paid for me to go and see Neil Young at Finsbury Park amongst, I think it was about 40,000 other people. And I thought it was a bizarre present for me because I'd never been especially a fan of Neil Young. He'd been starting to grow on me by that point a little bit. And the thought of going to a gig at Finsbury Park was just, why? I didn't particularly love going to that kind of huge stadium with TV screens and all of that stuff. But lo and behold, he did create a feeling of utter intimacy, which just seems like a miracle considering the location and the number of people that were present. And Another thing that really bugged me about that concert was not anything coming from the stage, but because people have been so deeply affected by Neil Young and sung his songs for so many years to themselves in their cars, that standing at a concert and hearing those songs is very difficult to control oneself. And I was someone who always attended a concert, and I still do to this day, in absolute silence so I can really take in the music. But I was just surrounded by people that were singing these anthems terribly at the tops of their voices. If Neil Young's voice was already annoying enough for me at a certain point, then the voices of all these people poorly emulating his songs was just torture. And yet, even despite all of that, I was able to have a really significant and magical experience being carried by his music on the wind. And I had to realize also that somebody's music at a certain point becomes part of folk culture. It's no longer theirs, it belongs to everybody who shares in that music. And I suppose, now I look back on it, I feel like I was a bit of a stuffy old git to be moaning about these people singing along, because at the end of the day they were participating in something that was akin to going to church. It was a spiritual event of being able to give voice to that which very often they probably had to keep to the confines of their own bedroom or their own car. So I'm going to give thanks for people who wail. I'm going to give thanks for the lesson that I learned in realising that although I might find a characteristic of somebody immediately annoying, that does not mean that they do not have great soul, great worth, great gifts to share with me. That although someone can have vastly different opinions to me on something, that does not negate their ability to be able to speak volumes to me, and I embrace those people and I realise that I share this life with those people. Neil Young has for me brought so many lessons as a musician, as a vocalist, as a lyricist, and it's very interesting that his band, is largely made up of people he's been playing with for decades, that his backing singers include his sister and his and other close friends and relatives, and that in itself speaks volumes. He's really got a community around him. He really has these long standing endearing friendships through which he continues to communicate such beautiful music. So Neil Young, I very much doubt that you would ever hear this, but should you do so, I want to honour you and say thank you, because you've taught me so much. And for all of us others who are here present in this video, I invite us just to take a moment of silence, a brief moment of silence, to give thanks for the contribution of Neil Young, to honour his work, and I will place a link to something for you to enjoy. Let his music speak for itself. To Neil Young.